Afternoon, everyone. For those who don't know me, my name is Billy. So I'd like to bring to the stage Shanna, who will be doing a presentation on cognitive biases. Please put your hands together for Shanna.
Thank you all for coming. I'm actually very surprised. I was almost hoping for no one turning up and then I could just go outside again. But no, thanks for coming today. I am firstly going to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. I pay my respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all First Nations people that may have joined us today. So let me just get this set up a little bit better so I can see what I've written here. So, cognitive bias in security teams. So if there's one thing that you need to know about biases, is that everybody has them. We all have them. But when we see the word bias in the media, it's usually in connection with something nasty or terrible, like somebody didn't get a job because of their gender, or law enforcement has arrested someone because of their race or nationality. So we tend to think of people who have biases in a negative way, and they're people that take extreme actions to exclude others. No one really wants to admit that you have a bias. But our biases can and often lead us in directions that we don't expect, and that we may not even intend. We might even disagree with them. For each of us, our individual biases drive our everyday decisions, from where we sit on the bus. Like, hands up if you get on the bus and you kind of look around and you're like, no, I'm not going to go sit next to him. She looks all right, I'll go sit next to her. All based on, purely just on, what they look like. I do that. Where we buy our coffee from. I'll also admit to going to, if I have a choice of cafes, I'll probably choose the cafe that's got maybe an Italian or a hipster-looking barista. Doesn't mean that they make coffee better because they have a moustache, but... and even which cubicle we use in the bathroom. I don't know if anyone else as well. You tend to, well, for the women, the ladies here, you tend to go to the same one every time for whatever reason. Beck choosing the same seat today several times over. So these biases are based on many factors, and that includes our upbringing, belief systems, personal experiences, and education. So in general, people are creatures of habit, as I've just kind of talked about. So you're generally going to, like, who here gets a different coffee every time they go to a cafe? Or do you get the same coffee every single time? Wow. Do you mix it up with one or two? I do two. Different?
Just depends on the day. So
nice. Yeah, out of the room of, 20 people? 1 in 20, we'll do something different. But usually, you find that mixture of ingredients that you like, and you keep doing that, and you stick with it. However, in business, the stick to what you know mentality often means that we're hiring the exact same people over and over. The thinking often is that if employee X, so if Shanna is doing a great job, and everyone gets along with Shanna, agree, then we'll look for more Shannas to hire. And then we'll end up with a team of exactly the same people. You tend to look for the same educational backgrounds, skill sets. You source them from a narrow set of companies. When you go out and you're looking to poach people, as if you're a hiring manager, you do that. You get on LinkedIn and you're off there. You will choose a certain set of companies that you think, people from that company are going to be pretty good. I'm going to go for them. And you look for similar personality traits during interviews, if you get along with them and why you get along with them. So before you know it, everyone acts and thinks like you generally, or to a degree, someone in your team, or they act almost exactly the same. But if you have a security team workforce that thinks and acts the same, how can you be sure that the decisions made and the actions taken are really the best decisions? Just because we've done it that way for 20 years doesn't mean it's the best way to do things for the next 20 years. And so our biases affect these decisions that we're making every day in our jobs. The decisions can and often affect the security of an organisation, and I've got some examples that are going to come up. So if we want to ensure that these are well thought out and researched decisions being made, building diverse teams can go a long way to achieving that. So what I would actually like you to take away today is that there are things that we can do as individuals. You know, we always ask, what can we do? What can I do to acknowledge the part that we play in the broader community and the biases that affect us? Not just gender bias. I'm talking about a whole other lot of biases. I'm also not perfect. I have my own biases. I succumb to them all the time. I have my own faults. I'm not perfect. Nobody's perfect. It's just about being aware. It's about finding the best way to challenge yourself and your organization to do better and work beyond our biases to create better teams. I'm also not a psychologist or psychiatrist, and I'm the second person on this stage that I know of that said that over the last 2 days. JP was here yesterday. This is all based on research that I've conducted, probably about 100 open Chrome tabs that may or may not have repeats. So filled with research and opinions of other people, plus my own experience. I've been in information security for around 21 years now. So it's been a long journey, and one that's still going, and I'm quite happy to continue it. So what is implicit bias or cognitive bias? They involve the associations outside of our awareness that lead to negative evaluation of a person on the basis of irrelevant characteristics. So you don't like someone because they have curly hair, or you don't like them because they, walk a certain way, something like that. It's really irrelevant to the kind of person that they are. But in the hustle and bustle of our lives, everyone's really busy. Our mental energy is probably one of our most important assets and currencies that we have. So in order to preserve our cognitive resources, our brain takes shortcuts. And these shortcuts are the cognitive biases. So while these preconceptions do not necessarily reflect reality or rationality in these decisions, we rely on them to expedite and simplify information processing in our brain. So these biases influence and affect not only the way we think and behave, but also our decision-making processes. These biases have also been a large part of our survival mechanism for humans over the years. Hear a roar, you run. You don't think about it. But I do have a little short video that I'm going to play. Let's see.
Many of you probably heard the big news about the Boy Scouts. This is a big story. Last week, the organization decided to allow girls to join, and they officially changed their name to just Scouts. Yeah. Cool. Now, of course, a lot of people have opinions about this, and they're wondering if making the organization co-ed is a good idea. We haven't talked about it yet. What do you think, Andy?
Well, I don't want to sway anyone's opinion, but I did get my hands on some footage from the co-ed scout camp. I think a lot of you will find it very troubling. Take a look.
Which one of you did this?
Hi, I'm Andy Richter, and I'm here to talk to you about implicit bias. If you watched that clip and assumed the owner of the curling iron would be a girl, then you just showed implicit bias. Something to think about. Okay, I think we got it. Let's give it up for my camera operator, Sam.
Thank you.
Hi, me again. And if you assume my camera operator, Sam, was a man, you've once again shown implicit bias. Check your bias. Okay, guys, we're really done now. I have to take my car to the mechanic. Yes! My mechanic is a woman. Damn it, people. This is exhausting. I'm spending the rest of my day fighting against gender inequality.
That video actually gets super weird after that point. I know I shared it with Bex. It was like, I'm just going to cut it off there. Beyond that is like a bit strange. But if these biases are implicit, or I don't like using the term unconscious bias because it kind of makes it sound as if it's unconscious and we can't do anything about it. But how do we break them, and how is it relevant to us in the security industry? Oh, is it not going to work? Yes. Nope. That's backwards. Well, that was a failure of a pen. So implicit bias can affect the security of your organization. So if implicit bias affects the decisions made by individuals in security teams, then that also shows that that will affect the security and potentially the security of the entire organization. And this is what I'm kind of here to talk about today, which is, me finally getting to the point and revealing the rest of the slide. So if we think about this for a moment, these decisions like it's that person who closed the alert because yesterday they had a same alert yesterday, it was a false positive, probably a false positive today, I'm just going to act that and close it. The person who's at reception who lets in the person dressed as an electrician because yesterday there was building works going on in the server room, so we'll let them in today because, they left their screwdriver or something behind. So those decisions are based on that particular individual's thought processes, which are based essentially on a whole bunch of life factors. And they have the ability to then impact what happens. So what if that wasn't a false positive this time and that alert could have saved or alerted to a ransomware attack? That electrician might have been a pen tester from Mercury ISS. And and they drop a Raspberry Pi on your server. So it's critical to evaluate individuals and team members holistically when you're building out security teams, particularly those charged with protecting organizations and or conducting investigations too. So how do you become aware of your own biases? It's really easy to call out other people. I know I'm pretty good at that. But it's a bit difficult to notice our own biases. It becomes challenging to recognize and actually acknowledge these behaviors in ourselves. But when we become aware of these shortcomings, we can then use what we have discovered in ourselves to help our leadership style or correct or potentially stop discriminatory behavior in ourselves and also in others. So it's a little bit about paying attention to your thoughts, examining your beliefs, and just identifying some assumptions that you currently hold. So anyone here, if you see someone in a meeting and they don't speak up, you've asked around, do you immediately assume that because they haven't spoken up, they might be uninterested? Or maybe they don't speak up because they don't feel comfortable? A lot of people would take the former. Oh, well, they didn't say anything, they're clearly uninterested and they don't have an opinion. And it may not be that way. What about if you showing signs of emotion in the workplace, like crying? Generally, that is treated as a sign of weakness. Doesn't need to be. People who miss deadlines, do you just automatically assume that they're unproductive or incapable? Or do you have the ability to go and look at why they actually have missed those deadlines and maybe listen to their reasons? So according to a 2012 Yale University study, male applicants were more likely to be hired and with a higher salary than female applicants. And I mean, we've all heard this, right? So this is in spite of having otherwise identical characteristics. And there's been studies where they have identical CVs applying for the same roles, and the one with the man usually gets the interview. There's an economist called Daniel Hammermesh, and he has a book called Beauty Pays: Why Attractive People Are More Successful, and claims that beautiful people make, on average, during their lifetime, $250,000 more than unattractive people. I don't know, who sets that definition. And there's a book called The Power of Thinking Without Thinking by Malcolm Gladwell, and he writes that in the US population, there's about 14.5% of all men are 6 foot or over, so not a huge amount. But among CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, that number is 58%. So because we are by definition unaware of our automatic unconscious beliefs and attitudes, we believe we are acting in accordance with our conscious intentions, when in fact it's generally our unconscious that's in the driver's seat. So it's possible for us to treat others unfairly, even if we believe we are wrong to do so. And so if it shows that our biases are made from how we are brought up, the books we read, the school we went to, our social circle, I know I'm in a bit of a vacuum when it comes to Facebook and, that bit of an echo chamber of my social circle in that regard, the media we read, then it's a logical next step that people from different backgrounds are going to have different biases. But that will bring a different perspective to the table. So some of these biases that are at play here. Right. So my favorite one first, and I think it's my favorite one because it's probably the one that I'm least, what would you say, Bex? It's probably the one I have least problem with, authority bias. I have absolutely no issue whatsoever telling someone higher up than me to F off. So authority bias is our natural tendency. I did have a little bit too much Prosecco last night. Our natural tendency to follow the leader. And there's a quote I quite like. Have no respect whatsoever for authority. Forget who said it and instead look what they start with, where they end, and ask yourself, is it reasonable? Evolution has selected us and has selected for a deep respect for authority. Society compounds this by organising and supporting this tendency into the dominance hierarchy. And you think about how we generally work in, board, CEO, management levels under that. And it's also, think about that statistic of the height of male CEOs in Fortune 500 companies as well. People over 6 foot are seen, generally speaking, not everyone, as more dominant. You were taught to respect authority from a very early age. You see authority figures everywhere as a kid. Teachers, parents, older siblings, coaches, grandparents, politicians, celebrities. And then again as an adult, your boss, their boss, the CEO, the board. It's all built into our social structures, essentially. So this story that I'm going to tell now is not cybersecurity related, and it'll get to a cybersecurity point eventually. But we go back in time to January 25th, 1990, and it was a routine flight from Bogota, Colombia to New York. It was Avianca flight 052. Does anyone know this story? Good. So the aircraft left Bogota without issue. I say that without issue. There were actually issues with the plane itself. There were a bunch of things that were gone wrong, but that is sort of not the point, but it comes back to a few things. Anyway, along the way, there was bad weather. So they needed to do, holding patterns. Everyone knows what a holding pattern is, where they have to go around and waste some time. That obviously uses fuel. So they've had to do 2 holding patterns on the way up and knew that there was bad weather at their destination. However, along the journey, no one's actually told any of the air traffic control along the way that they could potentially have fuel issues. So when they arrived in JFK in New York, the first officer was asked if they could do another holding pattern. So the first officer replied that they had only 5 minutes left of fuel. But you got to think, English is a second language, a bit of poor communication. The captain actually then still attempted to land the plane, knowing that they didn't have a lot of fuel. But with the bad weather, he couldn't actually land the plane and actually almost crashed about 2 miles off from the runway. So they pulled up and did a go-around procedure. I've done some of those at Canberra Airport. It's not fun. So the first captain didn't express any concern to the ATC, the air traffic control, about the fuel situation in a way that air traffic control would understand. They never talked about it being an emergency. They never mentioned to air traffic control during the first 2 holding patterns that they would run out of fuel at some point and could possibly have landed somewhere earlier. They failed to use the word emergency. The captain had asked the first captain to tell them it was emergency, however, the first captain did not. And so the air traffic controllers involved didn't hear the word emergency, they heard priority, and they didn't realise that it was actually an extreme emergency. So during that go-around procedure, the aircraft ran out of fuel, lost all engines, and flew into a nearby hill. So it killed 73 out of the 158 on board. So where am I going with this? Again, another little tangent. I like tangents. But every country has a different level of respect for authority. The Dutch social psychologist Gert Hofstede came up with a power distance index, so PDI. And that indicates how well do people in a certain country or background follow orders from an authoritative figure. So the higher the PDI value, the more respect they show authority. So Colombia is high up on that list in terms of they show a lot of respect to authority. The US is a lot lower on that list, and therefore the people in the US in air traffic control would have expected that the first captain would have talked back and said, no, we need to land now. We have to have priority. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. The co-pilot did not talk back or did not challenge the authority of the air traffic control. So cybersecurity and authority bias, and how can that be affecting us? So business email compromise, BECs. These scams are probably one of the most financially damaging cybercrimes. Nearly $2 billion in 2020. Is there any bigger statistics than that, Bex?
The biggest.
Yeah. Yeah, huge. But in many cases, it actually uses authority bias as a mean to defraud users. So, for example, an employee in the finance department receives a fraudulent email purporting to be the CEO asking for some money to be transferred into an account, or I've seen in my friend's organisation, they were asked to change the bank account details for the CTO for payroll. So often times, especially if you're looking at people from countries with a high PDI, they won't question. They will do what they think that the big boss has said them to do. So in that, have you ever considered, or has anyone ever heard of the PDI index? Do you ever consider that hiring? Do you hire people?
I haven't yet, but
Yeah.
I've been aware of others who have used it.
Yeah, so it's, maybe consider that when you're hiring a team and you're looking at people's backgrounds, and then consider a little more as what about the women from those countries? Always going to bring it back to the women. But a woman in those countries are probably going to have double the challenge when it comes to their ability to talk up. So when, you have somebody maybe in a meeting who's not talking up, maybe it isn't the fact that she doesn't want to say anything, she just doesn't feel comfortable because that's not how she's been brought up. So I'm not saying don't hire people, obviously, from a country with a high PDI, but it's just recognizing as a manager or even as, a colleague, that these biases exist in people, and it isn't necessarily a bad thing, but we do need to know about it. And the diversity of culture in teams can help to combat this. So there might be another person who knows that she won't speak up and will speak up on her behalf just because they know she's afraid to. Next one is the recency effect bias, and they're all up on the screen, yep. Did you know that most security teams admit to ignoring 1/3 of all security alerts, since a majority of them are false positives? I'm like, yeah, probably. I don't know where that statistic came from either. It's just, I liked it anyway. We've all heard the term alert fatigue. It's a pretty obvious one. And this is a recency bias, or an example of a recency bias. And I would have loved to get the ex-CISO from Target up here to talk about it, but he couldn't make it here today, so I'm going to share his story with you as best as I can. So it was an alert called malware.binary. Generic. Not much information was provided by the FireEye appliance, but still, it alerted on it, right? So it knew that there was something not quite right. Same alert happens quite a bit. Usually it's a false positive, so it was ignored. So it's likely that the security team at Target actually received hundreds of these alerts, making it extremely tough to have singled out this one threat, which actually turned out to be malicious. And this is a quote. Through our investigation, we learnt that after these criminals entered our network, a small amount of their activity was logged and surfaced to our team. That activity was evaluated and acted upon, Snyder said. Based on their interpretation and evaluation of that activity, the team determined that it did not warrant immediate follow-up. FireEye also has a function that automatically deletes malicious software, but that's usually turned off by security teams. They don't tend to keep it on because of the false positives. So they're more concerned about, a file. No, that's all good. I should be all right, maybe. I'll just continue outside. More concerned about malicious files or non-malicious files being deleted and impacting the business. So it happens quite often. If you're in an investigation, yesterday you see something odd, you look into it, it was benign, tomorrow you're probably going to make that same decision. You can say we can tune alerts better and all the rest of that. But this is a bias that can actually affect decision making. And it's actually why I hate closing alerts too. But obviously, has everyone heard of the Target breach many, many years ago? That was a really bad piece of malware, and that CISO lost his job. So that sort of thing happens all the time. Automation bias. So it's basically relying on automated scanners, outputs. Equifax breach. There was a vulnerability in the Apache struts. That's a web framework for developing Java applications. So the patch was released for this on March 7th, 2017. There was known exploits in the wild. So the news was to patch immediately. The Equifax administrators were told to apply the patch to any affected systems. They ran a scan. No systems came back to say that they needed patching. The web portal that was breached in May 2017 was not alerted that it was actually vulnerable. So in September 2017, Equifax announced that it had become the victim of one of the largest data breaches of all time. And the total cost of that breach is estimated to have been $1.4 billion. So relying heavily on automated scans, we don't rely on one tool generally in our job doing digital forensics. Did they even check that the scanner was up to date? Did they check that it was configured to scan all of the systems? They just let it run. No, we're fine, scanning one host. No, not vulnerable. Is that cynic in me again? So how do we become biased? Kind of talked about that. What are our influences? It's a bit like, what can make us aware? It is a bit like substance abuse, right? The first step is admitting you have a problem. So if you don't know what you need to change, how do we change it? Given that we surround ourselves by like-minded people. We need to pay attention to our thoughts, examine our actions, our beliefs. How do you react to people from different backgrounds? Think about it when you are looking at resumes or you're looking at people to join the team or your colleagues. Do you hold any stereotypes or assumptions about a particular social group? How do you acknowledge and leverage differences in the team? And do you put yourself in the shoes of someone else to empathize with their situation, even if you don't relate to it? And I know I'm running out of time, but I have a test, a couple of is this a bias test? So would you consider yourself, you don't need to put your hands up because, it might be embarrassing. Would you consider yourself being biased by giving a job to a candidate you clicked with just because you went to the same school or are interested in the same hobbies? And if they are different gender or ethnicity from you. So you're hiring them, they might be different gender, different ethnicity, you get along because you have the same hobbies. Is that a bias still? Yes, it is still a bias. It is an affinity bias. So it's favoring someone based on something that you have in common with them. And I'm going to skip that one, I'm going to go to this one. Actually, I would like, if you're brave, to put your hand up, because I find this a really interesting one. If one of your employees returns from maternity leave, is it unconscious bias to spare her the trouble of going on business trips or taking on extra responsibilities? Would you spare them or would you not? Put your hand up if you would spare them. So, yeah, it is a bias. It's a benevolence bias. You think you might be doing them a favour by sparing her the extra stress. However, that's for her to decide and not you. Just because maybe your wife, your mum, your sister, whoever wanted to take time off after they had a child doesn't mean that everybody else does. So this can affect somebody's career. If you're, I'm not going to give them that opportunity for a promotion. I'm not going to give them that opportunity to travel because they've just had a child. It can be detrimental to somebody's career. Ways to measure our, if we need to do something like this, we also need to measure it and measure our success. So you can measure it in a lot of different metrics. Start with the basics. Look at your gender diversity, look at your cultural diversity, religions, backgrounds, look at the equity of salaries across the organisation and the groups within the organisation. look at the creativity and productivity coming out of teams and look for a way to measure that so that you can actually start to track and measure how diversity can impact those teams and people within those teams. And analysts such as Forrester and Gartner will actually tell you that this stuff really matters. So employees and customers actually care about this stuff. Pen 10 has some statistics on there, just a shout out for Pen 10. I don't work there, I'm not affiliated with them in any way, but they actually have some of their diversity statistics on their website. And while it's not a huge amount of detail, it's a really good start, and I encourage you to take a look and maybe help if you're doing the same thing. How long do I have? Not long. 4 minutes. All right, so I've had it all. I want to hire the best person for the job, whether it be a man or woman. You probably just got hired for a diversity target. Hiring the best person for the job actually means hiring the best person for the team. And so building the best team means ensuring that there is diversity. Working with people who are different from you can challenge your brain and overcome stale ways of thinking. And Jasmine said it yesterday, and don't take offense to this, people, but it was pale, male, stale. So let's get over these stale ways of thinking. It can challenge the team to think better. There are a lot of studies out there that show diversity in teams. Teams with diversity outperform other teams. Companies with women on boards do financially better than companies who are all male, things like that. There are hundreds of surveys, statistics, reports, all of that stuff. So diverse teams are more likely to constantly re-examine the facts and remain objective. It's not easy to build a diverse team. Never said it was. You need to go out of your way to actually make it happen. If you don't have any diversity in your network, you need to go out and fix that and change that and find a way to actually make your hiring pool more diverse. Avoid trying to hire someone for a culture fit. What the fuck is culture fit anyway? Your culture may not be the culture that I want to be in. It can be really vague. Don't use it as a hiring metric. And be willing to try. Just give it a go. You can only go better or fail, right? So, look for those people who are going to make contribution to the community, contribution to teams. If you build the right team, that culture will come. So, also, if someone calls out your unconscious biases, don't get defensive. Try and take it as a learning experience. Reach out to a diverse group of peers to understand how they perceive you and seek continuous feedback. Embrace diverse perspectives. If your close circle looks just like you, it's time to build a more diverse network. I've pretty much spent my entire career fighting biases, the way I look, the way I talk, act, the fact I'm female. I'm pretty open and loud-mouthed, and not many people like that. But it hasn't stopped me. And I'm still here, and I hope that it doesn't stop anyone else in this room either. Be your authentic self. Build empathy. Have self-reflection, and educate yourself to lead a diverse and inclusive and equal team. That's all.
We've got a couple of minutes, so we can probably do a couple of quick questions, if anyone has any.
Just wondering, in small teams where maybe you've only got the opportunity to hire a graduate, someone without too much experience and maybe without the confidence to challenge, how do you train them? How do you build their confidence without passing on your own biases? So have you got any tools or techniques to help with that?
I think for me, it's about empathy. So putting yourself in their situation and not just being, I don't respond well, like I said before, I don't respond well to authority or being kind of told that the way I do things is not the way that you need to be doing them. So fostering their learning and allowing them to learn in the way that is the best way for them to learn. If they're a grad, they're not going to have confidence. We all know, I mean, I've been in this industry for 21 years and I'm still not confident. I'm still shooting myself upstairs before this, right? Confidence is going to take a long time. to build. But it's if you've got a supporting manager that isn't putting you down every time you do something wrong, or isn't putting you down because you don't talk up, that will give them the confidence to start building their own presence in their own way.
I think we've got time for one more quick question. Anyone?
Shanna, you might remember me. We spoke together at Crest earlier this year, and to declare to the room, I'm a sociologist.
Oh, that's right. Yes, because
yes,
you did the.
and cognitive bias.
Oh my gosh!
It's
I'm
okay.
glad I didn't realise that before I started.
It's okay. One of the key things I think needs to be added is the optimism bias. Right, so that's in cybersecurity. That's particularly a strong one where the boards and the executive think that they've invested in the techies, right? That they know how to do their job and we're going to trust that they're going to do it right. And then from the techies' perspective, it's like, well, would this potentially happen to me or not? Not likely. When we look at it, it's 88% of people think they have optimism bias. They do not think it will happen to them in terms of an attack. So it might happen to the organisation next to me, or last year I sat in this room and presented and got people to think about COVID, right, from an optimism perspective. And I said, who here thinks they're not going to get COVID? And most people thought it was going to be the person next to them. Like nearly everyone raised their hand and said, I won't get it, but the person next to me might get it. So just in terms of cybersecurity, I think it's a really additional one to add because we all sort of think it won't happen to me. And we kind of know a little bit that it might, but we tend to operate more on that. 88% of us operate more on that. It won't happen to me.
Good
so,
point.
no,
Thank
that
you.
was great.
Cool, thanks.
Give it up for Shanna, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks for coming and hanging around. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'll need this tonight.